The encounter. Ethan Carter leaned back in the pilot's chair of his small salvaging ship, the Starlight Nomad. The faint hum of the engines filled the cabin as he scrolled through the day's findings. A mix of old satellite debris and broken solar panels. Nothing exciting, nothing valuable. Life as a salvager was predictable and often lonely, but Ethan had made peace with it long ago. Suddenly, the ship's sensors blared a high-pitched alarm, jolting him from his thoughts. Ethan's gaze snapped to the display. A faint distress signal was coming from the edge of the asteroid belt, where no one sane ever ventured. The signal was weak, barely noticeable, and the coordinates pointed to a small, uncharted moon. "Great," Ethan muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He could ignore it. Plenty of salvagers did. But Ethan wasn't like most people. He knew that if someone was out there, clinging to life, and he didn't help, it would haunt him. With a heavy sigh, he adjusted the ship's course. All right, let's see who's calling for help. The moon was a desolate wasteland of jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. The Starlight Nomad landed with a soft thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the loose dirt. Ethan grabbed his toolkit and a flashlight, strapping a plasma pistol to his belt just in case. As he stepped out, the wind howled around him, carrying an eerie, almost mournful sound. Ethan activated his helmet scanner, following the distress signal to its source. It didn't take long to find it. A small, battered escape pod half buried in the dirt. The pod's exterior was scorched and clawed, as if it had been through a battle. Ethan's stomach tightened. Whatever had done this wasn't far behind. He moved closer, peering through the cracked viewport. Inside, he saw a figure slumped against the wall, a female alien with shimmering pale skin and delicate features. Her chest rose and fell faintly, but she was badly injured. Next to her was a small child, trembling and clutching her hand. His large, glowing eyes stared at Ethan with a mix of fear and desperation. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. They were scared, and he couldn't blame them. To them, he was just another strange creature, possibly a threat. "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said softly, even though he wasn't sure they could understand him. "I'm here to help." He tried the pod's hatch, but it was jammed. Using his toolkit, he pried it open, the metal groaning in protest. The child flinched, and the woman stirred weakly, opening her eyes. She said something in a language Ethan didn't recognize, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand you," Ethan replied, kneeling down to check her pulse. "But you're safe now. I'll get you out of here." Before he could do anything else, his scanner beeped again. A new warning flashed across the screen. Multiple heat signatures approaching fast. Ethan's heart raced as he turned to see dark shapes moving through the dust storm. The predators were here. Ethan wasted no time. He scooped up the child, who yelped in surprise but clung to him tightly. Then he carefully lifted the woman, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, her fragile frame barely more than skin and bones. He sprinted back to the ship as the shapes in the distance grew clearer. They were massive, four-legged creatures with sleek, black fur and glowing red eyes. Their claws dug into the ground as they charged, their guttural growls echoing across the moon. Come on," Ethan muttered, his boots kicking up dirt as he ran. The Starlight Nomad loomed ahead like a beacon of hope, its ramp still down. The child buried his face in Ethan's shoulder, trembling violently. The woman's breathing was shallow, her head lolling against his chest. Ethan's muscles burned, but he didn't stop. The creatures were closing the gap, their growls turning into ear-piercing shrieks. As soon as he reached the ramp, Ethan slammed his fist on the control panel, retracting it just as the first predator lunged. The creature's claws scraped against the metal, missing him by inches. Inside the ship, Ethan collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The child scrambled out of his arms and huddled next to his mother, his wide eyes darting between her and Ethan. The woman weakly reached out, her hand brushing against her child's cheek before she fell unconscious. Ethan staggered to his feet, locking the ship's doors and activating the shields. The predators circled outside, their glowing eyes staring through the viewport as they snarled and clawed at the hull. "Well," Ethan said, leaning against the wall, "this just got a lot more complicated." He glanced at the two aliens, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? What had happened to them? And most importantly, what had they done to attract such dangerous enemies? As the ship lifted off, leaving the predators behind, Ethan knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change forever. The rescue. The Starlight Nomad cruised through the void of space, leaving the desolate moon and its deadly predators behind. Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit, his fingers drumming on the console as he stared at the unconscious alien woman and her child in the medical bay through the ship's monitoring screen. His ship wasn't equipped for this. No advanced medical tech, no alien translation software, and certainly no guide for dealing with extraterrestrial refugees. Ethan had only his wits, a medkit meant for human injuries, and a growing sense of responsibility for his unexpected passengers. The child sat on a nearby seat, his large, luminous eyes never leaving his mother. His small frame trembled, whether from fear or the cold of the ship's interior. Ethan couldn't tell. "I don't even know your names," Ethan muttered, shaking his head. "How do I help you when I can't even ask what's wrong?" Ethan stepped into the cramped medical bay, crouching next to the woman. Her skin shimmered faintly under the harsh light, but the deep wounds on her side and arms told a grim story. He applied a basic disinfectant and wrapped her wounds in sterile bandages, hoping human supplies wouldn't react poorly to alien biology. As he worked, the child crept closer. Ethan glanced at him, unsure how to interact. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Your mom's gonna be okay, I think." The child tilted his head, studying Ethan with cautious curiosity. He didn't speak but raised a small, trembling hand to point at one of the woman's wounds. Ethan followed the gesture, realizing that part of the bandage was already soaked through with her strange, iridescent blood. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. "She's bleeding out." The ship's sensors beeped, startling him. Ethan rushed back to the cockpit and checked the display. His stomach sank. A large ship was approaching fast, its outline unmistakably predatory. It wasn't a rescue. It was a hunt. Ethan returned to the medical bay, trying to keep his growing panic in check. He grabbed the child's hand and guided him to a seat. "Listen to me, kid. Whoever hurt you, they're coming. We need to get out of here, but I can't do that if you're mom." Ethan trailed off, frustrated by the language barrier. The child looked at him, wide-eyed, then suddenly pressed a glowing hand to Ethan's arm. For a brief second, Ethan felt a strange warmth rush through him, and an image flashed in his mind. A symbol, like a starburst surrounded by swirling lines. He didn't understand its meaning, but it filled him with an odd sense of urgency. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" Ethan murmured. He glanced at the woman. "All right, fine. Let's get her to the cockpit. I don't know where we're going, but staying here isn't an option." With considerable effort, Ethan carried the woman to the co-pilot's seat, strapping her in securely. The child followed, clutching his mother's arm. Ethan powered up the engines, his hands flying over the controls. The hostile ship was closing the distance quickly, its sleek, black hull visible on the rear monitors. "I hope you guys are ready for a bumpy ride," Ethan muttered, gripping the controls tightly. He pushed the Starlight Nomad into full thrust, the ship vibrating under the strain. The pursuers fired, and the ship rocked violently as an energy blast grazed the shields. Ethan cursed under his breath. His salvaging vessel wasn't built for combat or high-speed chases. He needed to outmaneuver them, and fast. "Think, Ethan. Think," he whispered, scanning the star charts. A nearby asteroid field caught his eye. A dense maze of spinning rocks and debris. Dangerous, but survivable with precision flying. More importantly, it could slow down their pursuers. "Hold on," Ethan shouted as he veered the ship sharply toward the field. The child yelped, clinging to his mother's seat as the ship plunged into the asteroid belt. Rocks whizzed past, some narrowly missing the ship's hull. Ethan's focus was razor-sharp as he wove through the labyrinth, the hostile ship struggling to follow. Blasts of energy lit up the field as the pursuers fired blindly, trying to flush Ethan out. One shot clipped a large asteroid, sending chunks of rock spiraling toward the Starlight Nomad. Ethan barely dodged, his ship scraping against the debris. In the midst of the chaos, the woman stirred, her eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto Ethan. She muttered something in her language, her voice weak but urgent. Ethan glanced at her, confused. "I don't know what you're saying, lady, but I'm trying to keep us alive here," he said through gritted teeth. The child suddenly placed his glowing hand on the console, and to Ethan's astonishment, a holographic star map appeared. It wasn't from his ship's systems. It was alien, intricate, and alive with pulsating energy. The woman pointed weakly at a spot on the map, her voice barely audible. "You want me to go there?" Ethan asked, bewildered. She nodded faintly, her eyes filled with desperation. With no time to question, Ethan adjusted the course. The ship shot out of the asteroid field, heading for the coordinates. The hostile vessel hesitated, scanning for them among the debris. It wouldn't be long before they resumed the chase. As Ethan set the ship on autopilot, he turned to the woman and child. "All right, you've got me interested. What's at these coordinates, and why are those guys so eager to kill you?" The woman's eyes closed, exhaustion taking over. The child looked at Ethan, and for the first time, spoke a single clear word in a language Ethan could somehow understand. "Safe." Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling heavily. "Safe, huh? Let's hope you're right." But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger, the hidden threat. The Starlight Nomad glided through the silence of deep space, its hull scared but holding together. Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit, watching the unfamiliar star map projected from the child's strange ability. The map pulsed faintly, as though alive, guiding the ship toward an unknown destination. Ethan didn't trust it, but he had no better options. Behind him, the alien woman, Lyra, as the child had finally managed to convey through halting, telepathic impressions, lay resting in the medical bay. Her condition was stable but fragile, and Ethan couldn't shake the nagging fear that he was in over his head. The boy, Cale, sat nearby, quietly playing with a small object Ethan had salvaged, a broken compass from an old Earth ship. The child seemed fascinated by its needle, spinning it around and laughing softly. It was the first time Ethan had seen him smile. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Ethan muttered, glancing at the boy. "What's your story, kid? And why does the universe want you dead?" Cale didn't respond, but his glowing eyes flickered toward Ethan, full of both curiosity and something deeper, something older than a child should carry. Hours later, Ethan was jolted from his thoughts by a sharp beeping sound. The ship's systems had flagged an incoming message, a scrambled transmission. He hesitated before activating it, unsure if it was friend or foe. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. It wasn't in any language Ethan recognized, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Lyra stirred in the medical bay, her eyes fluttering open as if she had heard the message in her dreams. "Lyra," Ethan said, rushing to her side. "You understand that? What are they saying?" Lyra's lips moved, but her voice was weak. Cale stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder. A faint glow passed between them, and she seemed to gather strength. "They are warning us," she managed, her accent thick, but her words clear enough. "Do not go to the coordinates." Ethan froze. "What? That's where you told me to go. What's waiting for us there?" Lyra's gaze darkened, and she shook her head. "A trap. The hunters. They knew we would flee. They wait for us." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. If what she said was true, they were flying straight into danger. But why would the hunters go to such lengths to catch one woman and a child? What made them so important? All right, Ethan said, trying to stay calm. If it's a trap, we need to change course. Where else can we go? Lara looked at him, her expression heavy with regret. Nowhere. They will find us. They always do. Ethan clenched his fists. Not if I can help it. I've gotten us this far, haven't I? Cale tugged on Ethan's sleeve, his glowing eyes wide with fear. The boy pointed at the star map, which suddenly began to shift and pulse erratically. Ethan stared at it, trying to make sense of the change. The coordinates were no longer fixed. They were moving. What the hell? Ethan muttered, adjusting the ship's controls. Are those hunters tracking us through this thing? Lyra shook her head weakly. No. It is alive. The map is tied to Cale. He senses safety, but it is not fixed. It shifts with danger. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to process what she was saying. So you're telling me this kid's got some kind of psychic GPS? That's actually kind of amazing. Cale looked up at Ethan, a shy smile on his face, but it faded quickly. The boy suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm, and an intense vision flooded Ethan's mind. He saw a massive alien fleet, its ships sleek and bristling with weapons. At their center was a colossal vessel, glowing with the same eerie red light as the predators they had escaped on the moon. The vision shifted to Earth, Ethan's home, encircled by those same ships. The message was clear. Humanity was next. Ethan stumbled back, his heart pounding. Cale let go of his arm, his eyes wide with apology. You're showing me the future, Ethan said, his voice shaky. They're coming for Earth, aren't they? Lyra nodded solemnly. Not just Earth. They hunt all who resist their rule. My people, we were first. Humans, you are next. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had always known the galaxy was dangerous, but this was different. This wasn't random conflict or survival. This was extinction, planned and precise. Why? Ethan asked, his voice rising. Why are they after you? What's so special about you and Cale? Lyra hesitated, then looked at Cale. The boy reached out, placing his hand on her arm again. The glow passed between them, and Lyra seemed to gather her resolve. Cale is the last of our seers, she said finally. He can see the paths of fate, the threads that connect all things. The hunters, they fear him. They fear what he might show to those who fight back. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. If Cale's abilities were as powerful as she claimed, he wasn't just a refugee. He was a weapon the hunters were desperate to destroy. Well, Ethan said, forcing a grin. Good thing they're stuck with me, then. I don't give up that easily. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. You are different from the humans I was told about. Yeah, I get that a lot, Ethan said, heading back to the cockpit. Now let's figure out how to keep your kids safe, and maybe give those hunters a reason to regret chasing us. As the Starlight Nomad adjusted course, the star map pulsed again, guiding them toward an uncertain future. But for the first time, Ethan felt something more than fear. He felt purpose. The pursuit. The Starlight Nomad hurtled through the void, its engines groaning under the strain of Ethan's evasive maneuvers. On the main monitor, the pursuing vessel loomed larger, its sleek, black hull shimmering with a predatory sheen. The hunters weren't just chasing, they were playing a game, herding the smaller ship like prey. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the controls. They're faster than us. Smarter, too, he muttered. He glanced over his shoulder. Lyra sat strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her breathing shallow but steady. Cale huddled beside her, his wide eyes fixed on Ethan, with a mix of trust and terror. I hope you've got some tricks up your sleeve, kid, Ethan said, half joking. Because I'm running out. The ship's proximity alarms wailed. Ethan cursed under his breath, jerking the controls hard to the left. A bright red energy blast streaked past, narrowly missing the hull. The shockwave rattled the ship, sending tools and loose items clattering to the floor. Ethan. Lyra's voice was weak but urgent. They won't stop. Not until. I know, Ethan interrupted. They want the kid. And probably you too. He glanced at her. But they'll have to go through me first. The pursuing ship was gaining. Its weapon systems began to glow, charging for another volley. Ethan's mind raced. His salvaging ship wasn't designed for combat, and his defensive options were laughable at best. Shields wouldn't hold against another direct hit. He needed a plan, and fast. Then he saw it, a debris field ahead, scattered remnants of an ancient battle. Twisted metal hulks and shattered asteroids floated in eerie silence, their jagged edges glinting faintly in the starlight. It was a graveyard, a place even experienced pilots avoided. But to Ethan, it was an opportunity. You're not gonna like this, he muttered, adjusting the ship's trajectory. What are you doing? Lyra asked, her voice tight with fear. Giving us a chance, Ethan replied. Hold on to something. The Starlight Nomad dove into the debris field, weaving between massive chunks of wreckage. Ethan's hands moved instinctively, guiding the ship through impossibly tight spaces. Each turn brought a fresh wave of danger, collapsing structures, sharp metal shards, and unstable asteroid fragments. Behind them, the hunter ship hesitated at the field's edge, its pilot clearly calculating the risks. For a moment, Ethan dared to hope they might turn back. But then the hunters surged forward, their ship slicing through the debris with unnerving precision. Of course they're crazy enough to follow, Ethan muttered. He pushed the engines harder, the ship groaning in protest. Cale suddenly stood up, his small hands gripping the edge of the console. His glowing eyes widened as if seeing something no one else could. He pointed to a large, derelict vessel drifting ahead, its bulk obscured by shadows. Kid, now's not the time for sightseeing, Ethan said, dodging a spinning piece of debris. No, Lyra said, her voice stronger now. He sees something. Something important. Ethan frowned but adjusted the ship's course toward the derelict vessel. As they approached, Cale pressed his hands against the console. The ship's sensors flared to life, displaying a detailed schematic of the ancient ship. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Is that a functioning reactor? Lyra nodded. A trap. He's showing you a trap. The hunter ship closed the gap, its weapons locking onto the Starlight Nomad. Ethan gritted his teeth, his mind racing. If the derelict vessel's reactor still worked, he could overload it and create a blast strong enough to destroy their pursuers, or at least buy time. All right, Kel, you're officially my new co-pilot, Ethan said, his fingers flying over the controls. Lyra, strap him in. This is gonna get rough. As the Starlight Nomad skimmed the surface of the derelict ship, Ethan released a series of magnetic clamps, securing his ship to a stable section of the wreck. He activated the remote systems, hacking into the derelict's reactor. The interface was ancient and unfamiliar, but Ethan's salvaging experience paid off. Come on, he muttered as the reactor's core came online. Its energy levels began to spike, a low hum filling the cockpit. The hunter ship fired, a blast narrowly missing the Nomad. Ethan's ship shook violently, but the reactor's readings were almost at critical levels. Get ready, Ethan shouted. Lyra wrapped her arms around Cale, shielding him as the reactor reached its peak. Ethan hit the release, detaching the Nomad and boosting away from the derelict vessel at full speed. Behind them, the reactor detonated in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave ripped through the debris field, tearing apart the hunter ship's shields and sending it spinning into a massive asteroid. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, his hands trembling on the controls. That was way too close. As the Starlight Nomad limped away from the debris field, Lyra looked at Ethan with something approaching admiration. You saved us, she said softly. You didn't have to, but you did. Ethan shrugged, his expression guarded. Yeah, well, don't thank me yet. That was just one ship. There'll be more. Cale climbed onto Ethan's seat, his small hand resting on Ethan's arm. The boy's glowing eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment, Ethan felt an odd sense of peace. "Safe," Cale whispered, his voice like a distant echo. Ethan glanced at Lyra. "I don't know what your kid just did, but I hope he's right." As the nomad disappeared into the starry void, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the hunters were far from finished, and that Cale's mysterious abilities would only make their journey more dangerous. But for now, they were alive, and that was enough. Bonds forged. The Starlight Nomad drifted through the vast expanse of space, its battered hull groaning under the strain of the recent escape. Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls, his body aching from the tension of constant near-death experiences. He had managed to buy them some time, but for how long? The hunters were relentless, and their ship wasn't the only one out there. Behind him, in the ship's cramped common area, Lyra and Cale rested. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his eyes settling on the child. Cale was seated on the floor, drawing intricate patterns in the condensation on the window, his glowing eyes flickering with curiosity. Despite the fear and exhaustion, the boy seemed to find small moments of wonder in everything. Lyra, seated nearby, leaned against the wall, her posture weary but her gaze sharp. She watched Ethan carefully, as though still trying to decide whether he was a friend or merely a convenient ally. "You're not from around here, are you?" Ethan said, breaking the silence. Lyra's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "That is an understatement." Ethan turned his chair to face her fully. "I've been risking my neck for you too, but I still don't know the full story. I'm not saying I regret it, because, let's face it, I'm in too deep now. But I need to know what we're up against, what's really going on." Lyra sighed, her pale fingers brushing a strand of silvery hair away from her face. "My people, the Valora, were once a proud and peaceful race. We lived on a world called Cerinthus, far from the reaches of human colonies. But that peace ended when the Syndicate came." Ethan frowned. "The Syndicate? Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have," Lyra said. "They operate in the shadows, controlling entire star systems through fear and brute force. To them, we were a threat, not because of our weapons, but because of our abilities." Her gaze shifted to Cale, who was now quietly playing with a small salvage tool Ethan had given him. "The Syndicate fears the Valora Seers. They see them as an advantage that could tip the scales of power in the galaxy. So they destroyed us." Ethan leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Destroyed you? You mean they wiped out your entire planet?" "Not entirely," Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "Some of us escaped. But Cale, he's special. Even among the Seers, his potential is unique. The Syndicate will stop at nothing to capture him, or kill him if they can't." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, the weight of her words settling over him. "So that's why they're chasing you. But why me? I'm just some guy trying to make a living." "You are more than that," Lyra said, her tone softening. "You could have left us to die, but you didn't. You risked everything to help strangers. That is rare, Ethan Carter." For a moment, the room fell silent. Ethan shifted uncomfortably under Lyra's gaze, unsure how to respond. Finally, he stood and walked over to Cale, crouching down to his level. "Hey, kid," Ethan said, offering him a small smile. "You've got some serious powers. I bet you could tell me all kinds of secrets about the universe." Cale looked up at him, his glowing eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. He didn't speak, but he reached out, placing a tiny hand on Ethan's arm. A faint warmth spread through Ethan's skin, and for a brief moment he saw flashes of images, a lush green world filled with towering crystalline structures, and a group of alien children laughing and playing under a bright sky. Ethan blinked, the vision fading as quickly as it had come. "Was that your home?" he asked softly. Cale nodded, his expression somber. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair gently. "We'll find a way to keep you safe, kid. I promise." As the hours passed, the atmosphere aboard the ship began to lighten, if only slightly. Ethan showed Kel some of the odd trinkets he had collected over his years as a salvager: a rusted compass, a cracked data pad, and a model of an old Earth starship. The boy's fascination with the objects was contagious, and even Lyra's stern demeanor softened as she watched them interact. "You're good with him," she said quietly when Ethan returned to the cockpit. Ethan shrugged. "Kids are easier than adults. They don't have hidden agendas or political schemes. They just want to be safe and happy." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "And what do you want, Ethan Carter?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. "Honestly, I just want to live a quiet life. But it seems the universe has other plans." That night, or what passed for night in the unending void of space, Ethan sat alone in the cockpit, staring at the unfamiliar star map Kel had conjured. The glowing patterns shifted and pulsed, as though alive. He thought about Lyra's words, about the syndicate, and the destruction of her people. He thought about Kel, a boy too young to understand the weight of his destiny, but old enough to feel its pull. Ethan had spent most of his life avoiding trouble, staying out of galactic politics and wars. But now, he was in the middle of something far bigger than himself, and for the first time, he felt a spark of purpose. He wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for something worth protecting. Lyra's voice broke the silence. "Ethan." He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan gave her a small nod. "Get some rest. We've got a long fight ahead." As she walked back to the sleeping quarters, Ethan turned his attention back to the star map. It pulsed again, shifting to reveal a new set of coordinates. "All right, kid," Ethan murmured, setting the ship's course. "Let's see where this takes us." For the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The final stand. The Starlight Nomad hung in the shadows of a derelict space station, its damaged hull blending with the dark, skeletal remains of the ancient structure. Ethan Carter sat at the cockpit console, scanning the station's layout on a flickering monitor. The readouts were erratic, likely caused by centuries of neglect. It was the perfect hiding spot, or so Ethan hoped. "They're here," Lyra said from behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood by the cockpit door, her pale skin illuminated by the dim blue glow of the monitors. Ethan didn't look up. "I know." His tone was steady, but his fingers betrayed his nerves, tapping anxiously against the console. The sensors had picked up the approaching syndicate ship moments ago. Its sleek, predatory shape loomed on the edge of the station's perimeter, scanning for any sign of its prey. Kel, sitting cross-legged in the co-pilot's seat, clutched a small piece of metal Ethan had given him earlier. The boy's glowing eyes flickered as though mirroring the tension in the room. "They won't stop until they find us," Lyra continued, stepping closer. "This station won't hide us for long." Ethan finally turned to her, his jaw tight. "Then we don't let them find us. We make sure they wish they hadn't come looking." The station was a maze of twisted corridors, floating debris, and malfunctioning systems. Ethan, Lyra, and Kel moved cautiously through the labyrinth, guided by a flickering handheld scanner. The air was thin, stale, and laced with the metallic tang of rust. "This place is falling apart," Ethan muttered, stepping over a collapsed beam. "But it's got something they won't expect." Lyra glanced at him. "And what's that?" Ethan grinned grimly. "Defenses. Ancient ones." He led them to a central control room, its walls lined with consoles coated in layers of dust. The room hummed faintly with power, a testament to the station's advanced engineering. Ethan dropped his pack and got to work, prying open panels and reconnecting wires with practiced precision. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, watching him. "Waking up the station," Ethan replied, not looking up. "These old wrecks always have something useful. Automated turrets, shielding systems, maybe even a self-destruct. If we're lucky, we can use this place to even the odds. Kale wandered over to one of the consoles, his small hands brushing against its surface. The console flickered to life, glowing faintly as if responding to his touch. Ethan paused, raising an eyebrow. "Well, that's new," he said. "Kale has a connection to technology," Lyra explained. "It's part of his gift. He can awaken systems." Ethan shook his head, impressed. "Kid, you're full of surprises." The Syndicate ship drew closer, its scanners probing the station. Ethan watched the readings on his monitor, his stomach tightening. The Syndicate wasn't playing games anymore. They were closing in with surgical precision. Ethan activated the station's defenses, feeling a surge of satisfaction as ancient turrets powered up and targeted the approaching vessel. The station trembled as the turrets opened fire, bright streaks of energy cutting through the darkness. The Syndicate ship evaded the first volley with ease, its shields absorbing the hits. But the attack had done its job. It forced the hunters to slow down, giving Ethan and the others precious time. "We've bought ourselves a few minutes," Ethan said, turning to Lyra. "But that's all. When they breach the station, it's going to get ugly." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "Then we make our stand here." Ethan handed Lyra a plasma rifle, one of the few weapons he had salvaged over the years. She accepted it without hesitation, her hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. Kale stayed close to her side, his glowing gaze fixed on Ethan. "What about Kal?" Lyra asked. "He's just a child." Ethan crouched in front of the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Kale, listen to me. I know you're scared, but you're stronger than you think. You've already saved us more times than I can count. I need you to stay close to your mom and do whatever it takes to keep her safe. Can you do that?" Kale nodded, his small hand gripping Ethan's tightly for a moment before letting go. The station shook as the Syndicate ship docked. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the corridors. Ethan tightened his grip on his pistol, his mind racing. He had prepared the station's defenses as best he could, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Syndicate soldiers would be armed with advanced tech, and they weren't coming to negotiate. The first wave came swiftly. Sleek, humanoid figures in black armor, their movements precise and deadly. The station's automated turrets fired, taking down a few before the rest disabled them with EMP bursts. Ethan and Lyra opened fire from their position, using the narrow corridor to their advantage. The Syndicate soldiers moved methodically, their shields absorbing most of the shots. Ethan cursed under his breath, retreating deeper into the station. "Fall back," he shouted. "We need to draw them into the trap." Kale stood in the control room, his small hands resting on the central console. The air around him seemed to shimmer as his abilities activated, sending pulses of energy through the station's systems. Lights flickered, and the walls hummed with power. Ethan and Lyra retreated to the control room just as the Syndicate soldiers breached the outer door. Ethan activated a series of plasma mines he had rigged in the corridor, the explosions sending shockwaves through the station. The soldiers were thrown back, but more were coming. Cal's eyes glowed brighter, and suddenly the station's systems roared to life. Old, rusted drones floated into the corridor, their weapons sparking as they targeted the invaders. The Syndicate soldiers hesitated, clearly unprepared for the sudden resistance. Ethan grinned. "Nice work, kid." But the victory was short-lived. The Syndicate's leader, a towering figure in ornate armor, stepped through the wreckage. His presence was commanding, his voice cold and mechanical. "Hand over the child," he said, his gaze fixed on Kale. "Or everyone dies." Ethan stepped in front of Kale, his pistol raised. "You'll have to go through me first." The leader tilted his head, almost amused. So be it. The final battle was chaos. The control room became a war zone as Ethan, Lyra, and Kale fought desperately against the Syndicate. Cal's abilities flared, sending bursts of energy that disrupted the soldiers' systems, but the toll on his small body was evident. Ethan pushed himself to the limit, his determination fueled by the need to protect Kale and Lyra. The syndicate leader advanced, his strength overwhelming, but Ethan refused to back down. In the end, it was Kale who turned the tide. With a final surge of power, he unleashed a wave of energy that enveloped the syndicate forces, disabling their systems and forcing them to retreat. As the station fell silent, Ethan collapsed to the floor, his chest heaving. Lyra knelt beside Kale, holding him tightly as the boy's glow dimmed. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "For now." But he knew the fight was far from over. This was only the beginning. Guardians of Hope. The Starlight Nomad limped away from the derelict space station, its hull scorched and systems barely holding together. Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit, one hand on the controls and the other gripping his side, where a shallow plasma burn had seared through his jacket. The pain was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the exhaustion weighing on him. Behind him, in the cramped medical bay, Lyra tended to Kale. The boy lay on the cot, his glowing eyes dim and his breaths shallow. The final surge of his abilities had taken everything out of him. Lyra's hands moved with practiced precision, mixing alien remedies with what little human medical supplies they had left. "How's he doing?" Ethan called over his shoulder. Lyra's voice was steady but tinged with worry. "He's alive, but he needs rest. His abilities, they drain him more than I realized." Ethan sighed, his grip tightening on the controls. "He saved us. Without him, we'd be dead back there. And because of him, they will keep coming." Lyra said softly, "We cannot run forever." Ethan leaned back in his seat, staring at the flickering star map on the console. It pulsed faintly, shifting again as if guiding them. "Then maybe it's time we stop running." Hours passed in tense silence. The Starlight Nomad drifted toward the coordinates Cal had unwittingly provided, a location far from Syndicate-controlled territory. Ethan didn't trust the map completely. It seemed almost sentient, and that unsettled him. But they had no other choice. As the ship approached the new coordinates, Ethan's sensors picked up something unexpected. A massive station floated in the void, its structure gleaming with advanced technology that made even the Syndicate's ships look primitive. It was ancient but still alive, its lights pulsing with energy. "What is this place?" Ethan muttered, bringing the ship to a halt just outside the station's perimeter. Lyra stepped into the cockpit, her expression unreadable. "It's a Valoran sanctuary, or what's left of it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You knew about this?" She shook her head. "No, Kale must have found it. He has a connection to our people's legacy, to places like this. It was built long before my time." Ethan frowned. "Think it's safe?" Lyra looked at Cull, who had appeared silently in the doorway, his small frame leaning against the wall. His glowing eyes met Ethan's, and he gave a slight nod. "It's safe," Lyra said, her voice filled with certainty. The Nomad docked with the station, and the trio stepped onto its pristine floors. The air was warm and rich with oxygen, a stark contrast to the stale atmosphere of the derelict they had just escaped. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, glowing softly as if reacting to their presence. Kale moved ahead of them, his tiny hands brushing against the walls. The carvings lit up in response, creating a path of light that guided them deeper into the station. Ethan and Lyra exchanged wary glances but followed without hesitation. As they walked, the station seemed to come alive. Drones hovered out of hidden alcoves, scanning them briefly before retreating. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his pistol, but the drones made no aggressive moves. "They're guardians," Lyra explained. "They recognize us as allies." Kale led them to a central chamber, where a massive holographic projection of the galaxy filled the room. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Each star pulsated with its own unique rhythm, and faint lines connected certain systems, forming a web of light. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice hushed. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. "A Valoran archive. It's a map of the Syndicate's influence and the resistance against them. As Lyra studied the map, Ethan's gaze drifted to Cale. The boy stood in the center of the room, his glowing eyes fixed on the hologram. He raised a hand, and the projection shifted, zooming in on a cluster of systems near the edge of Syndicate territory. That's Earth, Ethan realized, his stomach tightening. The lines connecting Earth to other systems flickered ominously. They're planning an attack. Lyra nodded, her expression grave. It seems their focus is shifting. They know humanity has the potential to resist them. The Syndicate sees your kind as a threat. Ethan clenched his fists. We have to warn them. Earth doesn't even know what's coming. Cale turned to Ethan, his small hand reaching out to touch his arm. A wave of warmth passed through Ethan, and for a brief moment, he saw a vision. A united front of humans and other species standing against the Syndicate. It was a fleeting image, but it filled him with a strange sense of hope. He's showing you the future, Lyra said. A future where we fight back. The station provided them with resources Ethan could only dream of. Advanced weaponry, shields, and a ship repair system that brought the Starlight Nomad back to pristine condition. As they prepared to leave, Lyra activated one last feature of the archive. A message played in the ancient Valoran language, and though Ethan couldn't understand it, the tone was clear. It was a call to arms. What did it say? Ethan asked. It's a warning, Lyra said. To all who hear it, the Syndicate's reign will end, but only if we unite. Ethan's gaze hardened. Then that's what we'll do. We'll warn Earth, and we'll find others. Anyone who's willing to fight. Cale stepped forward, his glowing eyes meeting Ethan's. The boy's expression was calm, but his voice, when he spoke, carried an eerie certainty. Together, Cale said, the single word echoing in the chamber. As the Starlight Nomad left the sanctuary, its weapons upgraded, and its crew more determined than ever, Ethan felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Syndicate couldn't understand. The will to fight for something greater. Ethan glanced at Lyra and Cale, his unlikely companions turned family. We've got a long road ahead, he said. But if anyone can pull this off, it's us. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of danger. But for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a guardian, standing for the future.